Pack your bags, we're selling your house. I hung up the phone in shock, but what I discovered next made my blood run cold. The revenge I served them will haunt their dreams forever. I'm grateful you're here with me today. Stay until the very end and comment which country you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. I never imagined that at 70 years old, my own flesh and blood would try to make me homeless. My name is Eleanor Blackwood, and at 70 years old, I thought the hardest battles of my life were behind me. I'd weathered more storms than most people face in 3 lifetimes. 23 years ago, I buried my beloved husband Thomas after a sudden heart attack that took him at just 52. I'd survived cervical cancer in my 50s, fighting through chemotherapy and radiation while working full-time to keep our family afloat. I raised 2 children as a widow, working double and sometimes triple shifts at Greymont Manufacturing Company to make sure Penelope and Christopher had everything they needed. My home sat on Willowbrook Lane in the quiet neighborhood of Cedar Heights, a modest 2-bedroom cottage with forest green shutters and a wraparound porch that I'd painted myself just last spring. The house wasn't grand by any stretch of the imagination, but it was mine. Every single inch paid for through 38 years of blood, sweat, and determination. The mortgage had been satisfied 7 years ago, and I still remember the day I made that final payment. I'd sat at my kitchen table, holding the deed in my trembling hands, knowing that no one could ever take this sanctuary away from me. Or so I thought. The cottage held 40 years of memories within its walls. The living room where Thomas had taught our children to play chess on Sunday afternoons, the kitchen where I'd baked hundreds of birthday cakes and prepared thousands of family dinners, the master bedroom where I'd nursed both children through chickenpox, pneumonia, and broken hearts, the small garden out back where Thomas had built raised beds for my tomatoes, and where I still grew herbs and vegetables that lasted me through each winter. Every creaky floorboard told a story. The squeaky third step on the staircase that had warned me when teenagers tried to sneak out. The loose tile in the bathroom that Thomas had never gotten around to fixing, and that I'd left as it was because somehow it felt like keeping a piece of him with me. The bedroom window that faced east, where I watched the sun rays every morning with my coffee, grateful for another day in the home I'd worked so hard to keep. Cedar Heights had been our neighborhood for 4 decades. I knew every family, had watched children grow up and have their own children. Mrs. Cordelia Ashworth lived to my left. She was 67 and had been my closest friend since the day we moved in. We shared coffee every Tuesday morning and had a standing dinner date every Friday night. To my right lived the Martinez family, young parents with 3 small children who reminded me of my own kids at that age. I helped with babysitting when needed, and they shoveled my driveway in winter without being asked. This was my community, my support system, my life. These weren't just neighbors, they were chosen family. My daughter Penelope lived 25 minutes away in the prestigious Riverside Estates, where houses started at $500,000 and homeowners associations enforced strict rules about lawn height and mailbox colors. She lived there with her husband Marcus Caldwell, a successful real estate developer who specialized in commercial properties throughout the tri-state area. Their house was a sprawling colonial with 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, a 3-car garage, and enough space to host the charity fundraisers that Penelope organized for her marketing firm's clients. Penelope had always been driven, even as a child. While other kids played with dolls or video games, she was organizing neighborhood lemonade stands and calculating profits. She'd graduated summa cum laude from State University with a degree in business administration, then earned her MBA from a prestigious private college that had cost me 3 years of overtime shifts to help fund. Now she was a senior marketing executive at Meridian Technologies, pulling in a 6-figure salary and living what most people would consider the American dream. My son Christopher had taken a different path. After college, he moved to Portland, Oregon to work as a software engineer for a startup company. We talked every Sunday without fail, and he visited twice a year, once in summer and once during the Christmas holidays. The distance made spontaneous visits impossible, but our relationship had remained close despite the miles between us. He sent flowers on my birthday, called when he got promotions or faced challenges, and still asked my advice on everything, from career decisions to relationship problems. Christopher had always been my gentle child, thoughtful and considerate, in ways that sometimes made me worry the world would be too harsh for his sensitive nature. But he'd found his place in the tech world, where his creativity and problem-solving skills were valued. He'd never married, preferring to focus on his career and his passion for rock climbing and photography. His apartment was filled with stunning landscape photos he had taken during weekend hiking trips throughout the Pacific Northwest. Since Christopher lived across the country, it naturally fell to Penelope to be the local child who checked on me. At first, this arrangement had worked beautifully. She'd stop by every few weeks, sometimes bringing Marcus and their twin boys Jeremy and Julian, who were now 8 years old. The boys would play in my garden while the adults caught up over coffee and homemade cookies.
But over the past year, something had shifted in our relationship. Penelope's visits had become more frequent, but also more intrusive. She'd started commenting on everything from the state of my garden to the cleanliness of my kitchen. She'd begun asking pointed questions about my finances, my medical appointments, and my daily routines. What had once felt like caring concern had gradually transformed into something that felt more like surveillance. "Mom, you're not as young as you used to be," became her favorite phrase. "Mom, you need to think about the future. Mom, what if something happens and no one finds you for days?" The shift had accelerated after a minor health scare I'd experienced 14 months ago. I'd been working in my garden on a particularly hot July day when I'd felt dizzy and short of breath. Mrs. Ashworth had found me sitting on my porch steps, looking pale and disoriented. She'd insisted on driving me to the emergency room, where doctors ran a battery of tests before determining that I'd simply been dehydrated and overheated. But during the 3 days I'd spent in the hospital for observation, Penelope had swooped in like a hurricane of efficiency and concern. She'd handled the insurance paperwork, spoken with doctors, and generally managed every aspect of my care. I'd been grateful at the time, especially when the medical bills started arriving and the insurance company proved difficult to navigate. That's when Penelope had suggested I sign a limited power of attorney document, just for medical situations like this. She'd explained that having the legal authority to speak with doctors and insurance companies on my behalf would make future medical crises much smoother to handle. The document she brought to my bedside had looked official and proper, filled with legal language that made my head spin. But Penelope had patiently explained each section, assuring me that it only gave her authority over medical decisions and related financial matters. "It's just a safety net, Mom," she'd said, holding my hand as I signed. "God forbid something serious happens, but if it does, this means I can advocate for you properly. I can make sure you get the best care and that all the insurance nonsense gets handled correctly." It had made sense at the time. I'd felt vulnerable lying in that hospital bed, connected to monitors and facing a stack of medical bills I didn't understand. Having Penelope handle the administrative burden had felt like a blessing, not a curse. Now I was beginning to wonder if I'd made the biggest mistake of my life. The phone call that would change everything came at 3:17 a.m. on a Tuesday in late October. The autumn night was crisp and clear, with a full moon casting silver shadows through my bedroom curtains. I'd been sleeping peacefully when the shrill ring of my bedside phone jolted me awake. My heart immediately began racing. Calls at that hour meant only one thing: emergency. In my experience, people only telephoned in the middle of the night to report accidents, heart attacks, house fires, or death. I fumbled for the phone in the darkness, my arthritic fingers struggling with the buttons as my mind raced through terrible possibilities. Was it Christopher calling from Portland? Had something happened to one of the grandchildren? "Hello?" My voice came out as a croak. "Mom, it's Penelope." Her voice was sharp and businesslike, completely devoid of the warmth or concern I would have expected from a daughter calling her elderly mother at such an hour. "Penelope? Honey, what's wrong? Are you hurt? Is Marcus okay? Are the boys all right?" "Everyone's fine, Mom. This isn't about an emergency. We need to talk about your living situation." I sat up in bed, confused and increasingly alarmed. My living situation? What about it? And why are you calling at 3 in the morning?
Because I've been awake all night going over your financial records, and I can't put this off any longer. Mom, this house situation has become completely unsustainable. The words hit me like a physical blow. I turned on my bedside lamp, squinting in the sudden brightness as I tried to process what my daughter was telling me. What house situation, Penelope? I don't understand what you're talking about. The maintenance costs, Mom, the property taxes that keep going up every year, the utilities, the insurance, the constant repairs that old houses need. It's bleeding you dry, and you can't keep pretending otherwise. I looked around my familiar bedroom, trying to make sense of this conversation. Penelope, my house is fine. The taxes aren't that high, and I've kept up with all the maintenance. What repairs are you talking about? Mom, I've been going through your bank statements and bills. Do you realize you spent over $3,000 last year just on heating costs? And that's going to get worse as the house gets older and less energy efficient. A cold dread began settling in my stomach. How have you been going through my bank statements? There was a pause before she answered. The power of attorney you signed gives me access to your financial records so I can help manage your affairs. And what I have found is deeply concerning. You've been looking through my personal finances without asking me? Mom, that's what power of attorney means. I have the legal authority to review your financial situation and make decisions that are in your best interest. And after careful analysis, Marcus and I have concluded that maintaining this house is no longer financially viable for someone in your position. Someone in my position? What position is that exactly?
An elderly woman on a fixed income trying to maintain a property that's too large and too expensive for her needs. Mom, you're house poor and you don't even realize it. I felt anger beginning to build alongside the confusion and dread. Penelope, I am not house poor. I own this home outright. I have no mortgage payments. My expenses are completely manageable on my Social Security and pension. Are they really? Because according to your bank records, you're spending over 60% of your monthly income just on housing-related expenses. That's not sustainable, Mom. What happens when the roof needs replacement? What happens when the furnace dies? What happens if you need major medical care that isn't fully covered by Medicare? Each question felt like an accusation, as if I were a child who'd been caught being irresponsible with her allowance money. Penelope, I've been managing my own finances successfully for 70 years. I think I know what I can and cannot afford. Do you? Because the numbers tell a different story. Marcus ran a full analysis of your financial situation, and he says you're one major expense away from financial disaster. Marcus ran an analysis? You've been discussing my private financial information with Marcus? He's a real estate professional, Mom. He understands these things better than either of us. And he's identified a solution that will solve all your problems. The dread in my stomach was growing heavier by the minute. What kind of solution? We're putting the house on the market. Marcus has already spoken to his colleague Rebecca Chen at Prestige Properties. The housing market is incredibly hot right now, and properties in your neighborhood are selling for top dollar. A house like yours could easily bring $320,000, maybe more if we're strategic about the listing. The words seemed to echo in my ears, as if they were coming from very far away. I gripped the phone tighter, certain I must have misunderstood. Penelope, you cannot sell my house. This is my home. Mom, you're not thinking clearly about this. You're 70 years old. You can't maintain a property like this anymore. What happens when you fall down those front porch steps? What happens when you can't manage the yard work or the snow removal? What happens when you need help and there's no one around to provide it? I manage just fine. I've been taking care of this house and myself for decades. Her voice took on that patronizing tone that had become increasingly common in our conversations over the past year. Mom, Mrs. Ashworth called me last week. She's worried about you. She said she's noticed that you're struggling with tasks that used to be easy for you. The mention of my closest friend felt like a betrayal, almost as sharp as the conversation itself. Mrs. Ashworth said what? She's concerned because she sees you having trouble with your groceries, with your garden maintenance, with basic household tasks. She doesn't want to hurt your feelings, but she felt someone in the family should know that you're not managing as well as you think you are. I thought about my friendship with Cordelia Ashworth, built over decades of shared morning coffees, evening walks, and mutual support through life's challenges. The idea that she was secretly monitoring my activities and reporting back to my daughter felt like a knife twisting in my chest. My groceries and garden are fine, Penelope, and I resent the implication that I'm somehow failing to take care of myself. Mom, please don't make this more difficult than it needs to be. We're trying to help you here. Marcus has already arranged for Rebecca to come out Thursday morning to do a market analysis and property assessment. She'll give us a realistic idea of what the house will bring. Penelope, stop talking and listen to me. I am not selling my house. This is not a discussion. This is not negotiable. This is my home, and I'm not leaving it. Actually, Mom, it's not your decision anymore. The power of attorney gives me the legal authority to make these kinds of financial decisions on your behalf. And I'm telling you that selling this house is what's best for your future security and well-being. That document was for medical situations. It wasn't supposed to give you control over my entire life. Power of attorney is power of attorney, Mom. The document you signed gives me broad authority over your financial affairs. I've checked with our family lawyer, and he confirms that selling the house falls well within my legal rights as your attorney in fact. I felt the world tilting beneath me. You've discussed this with a lawyer? Of course I have. I wanted to make sure I was handling this properly and legally. Mom, the money from this sale will set you up beautifully for the rest of your life. We've already looked at several excellent senior living communities in the area. There's a lovely place called Golden Years Manor that has everything you could want. Activities, meals provided, medical care on site, transportation to shopping and appointments. You'll make new friends and have a much easier, more comfortable lifestyle. I don't want a new lifestyle. I want my life in my house with my friends and neighbors who actually care about me. We do care about you, Mom. That's exactly why we're doing this. You'll love Golden Years Manor once you give it a chance. They have a beautiful dining room, a library, game rooms, even a small movie theater. It's like living in a resort.
It's like living in a prison. Penelope, I'm 70 years old, not 90. I drive, I cook, I take care of myself and my home perfectly well. I have friends, routines, a community here. You can't just uproot me from my entire life because you've decided it's inconvenient. Inconvenient? Mom, this isn't about convenience. This is about safety and financial security. What happens when you have another health scare? What happens when you need daily assistance? What happens when this house becomes too much for you to handle? Then I'll deal with those problems when they arise. But right now, today, I'm perfectly capable of living in my own home. Are you really? Because Rebecca already did a drive-by assessment yesterday, and she identified several maintenance issues that need immediate attention. The gutters need cleaning, there's a loose board on the front porch, and the driveway has several cracks that could be trip hazards. The violation I felt was overwhelming. She was here without my permission. You sent a stranger to my house to evaluate my property without even telling me? She just drove by to get a general sense of the property's condition. It's called a preliminary assessment, and it's standard procedure. But what she saw confirmed what Marcus and I already suspected. You're not keeping up with basic maintenance anymore. Those are minor issues that I can handle myself or hire someone to fix. With what money, Mom? You're already stretched thin financially. And even if you could afford the repairs, what about next year when other things break? What about 5 years from now when major systems start failing? I looked around my bedroom, at the furniture Thomas and I had chosen together, at the family photos covering my dresser, at the quilt my mother had made for my wedding 42 years ago. This wasn't just a house.
It was the repository of my entire adult life. Penelope, this house isn't falling apart. It's well-maintained and structurally sound. And even if it needed repairs, that's my decision to make, not yours. Not anymore, it isn't. Mom, the realtor is coming Thursday at 10 a.m. I suggest you start going through your belongings and decide what you want to keep for the move to Golden Years. We'll handle the rest. I'm not going through anything because I'm not moving anywhere. Yes, you are. The moving truck is scheduled for next Monday. Golden Years has a lovely studio apartment available immediately, and we've already put down a deposit to hold it for you. The betrayal was complete. They hadn't just made the decision to sell my house, they'd already set the entire process in motion without my knowledge or consent. You put down a deposit on an apartment without asking me? We put down a deposit to secure your future, Mom. You should be thanking us instead of fighting us every step of the way. Thanking you? You want me to thank you for stealing my home. We're not stealing anything. We're protecting your assets and ensuring your safety. Mom, what are you going to do? Call a lawyer? With what money? Fight us in court? With what resources? Be realistic here. The casual dismissal of my rights and autonomy was breathtaking. You think I'm helpless, don't you? I think you're an elderly woman who's having trouble accepting that she needs help. There's no shame in that, Mom. It happens to everyone eventually. The shame would be in letting pride prevent you from making smart decisions. And you've decided what constitutes a smart decision for me? Someone has to. Left to your own devices, you'd stay in this house until something terrible happened. Until you fell and couldn't get help, or had a medical emergency with no one around, or couldn't afford heating oil and froze to death in your own living room. Each scenario was more dramatic and terrifying than the last, designed to make me feel helpless and vulnerable. Those are hypothetical problems, Penelope. I'm dealing with reality, not your imagination. This is reality, Mom. You're 70 years old, living alone, in a house that's too big for you, with no support system nearby. I have an excellent support system. Mrs. Ashworth checks on me daily. The Martinez family next door looks out for me. My doctor is 5 minutes away. My pharmacy delivers. My grocery store is walking distance. This is my community. That's not a support system. That's a collection of acquaintances and service providers. What happens when Mrs. Ashworth gets sick? What happens when the Martinez family moves away? What happens when you need real help, not just friendly check-ins? Then I'll figure it out, like I figured out everything else in my life. There was a long pause before Penelope spoke again, and when she did, her voice was colder than I had ever heard it. Mom, I'm going to say this once, and I need you to really hear me. This discussion is over. The house is being sold. You're moving to Golden Years Manor. These are not suggestions or requests. They are decisions that have already been made. You can cooperate and make this transition as smooth as possible, or you can fight us and make everything harder on yourself. But the outcome is the same either way. And if I refuse, then we'll have you declared incompetent to manage your own affairs and proceed anyway. Is that really how you want this to go? The threat hung in the air like poison gas. My own daughter was threatening to have me declared mentally incompetent if I didn't comply with her demands. You would do that to me? We would do whatever is necessary to protect you, even if it meant protecting you from yourself.
I closed my eyes, feeling decades of love and sacrifice crumbling around me. This was the child I'd worked 3 jobs to support, the young woman whose wedding I'd paid for by cashing in my retirement savings early, the daughter I'd helped through graduate school, career changes, and the difficult early years of her marriage. Penelope, how can you treat me this way? We're not treating you badly, Mom. We're making difficult decisions that you're not capable of making for yourself anymore. That's what family does. Family doesn't steal each other's homes and threaten them with mental competency hearings. Family protects each other, even when that protection isn't wanted or appreciated. The line went dead. I sat in my bed, staring at the phone, my hands trembling with shock and rage. My daughter had just informed me that I was losing my home, my independence, and my right to make decisions about my own life. Not asked, not discussed, not negotiated, informed. But as the initial shock began to wear off, something else started building inside me. Something harder and colder than the October wind rattling my windows. Something that reminded me of the woman who'd raised 2 children alone while working multiple jobs. The woman who'd fought cancer and won. The woman who'd built a life from nothing after being widowed at 47. Penelope thought she could steamroll over me because I was old, because I was alone, because she had a piece of paper that supposedly gave her the right to control my life. She thought I was a helpless, elderly woman who would meekly pack her bags and shuffle off to a nursing home while she profited from the sale of my sanctuary. She was about to learn just how wrong she was. I got out of bed and walked to the kitchen, where I kept my important documents in a fireproof metal filing box. It was time to do some research of my own, starting with exactly what that power of attorney document actually said and what rights I still retained over my own life and property. Because something told me that Penelope's version of events wasn't the complete truth. And if there's one thing 40 years in this house had taught me, it was how to fight for what was mine. The battle for my home was about to begin. Sleep was impossible after that phone call. I lay in my bed staring at the ceiling until dawn broke through my curtains, my mind racing through everything Penelope had said. The more I replayed the conversation, the angrier I became. Not just at her words, but at the calculated coldness behind them. This wasn't a daughter concerned about her mother's welfare. This was someone executing a plan they'd been developing for months without my knowledge. By 6 a.m., I was dressed and sitting at my kitchen table with the metal filing box open in front of me, a strong cup of coffee steaming beside me. The power of attorney document was right where I had left it 14 months ago, filed under medical documents because that's what I had believed it was. I spread the papers across my kitchen table and began reading every word with the careful attention I should have given it the first time. The legal language was dense and confusing, filled with phrases like attorney in fact and broad discretionary powers that meant nothing to my layperson's understanding. But as I read more carefully, certain sections began to jump out at me. The agent is hereby granted full power and authority to act on behalf of the principal in all financial matters, including but not limited to the management, sale, or disposition of real property. My blood ran cold. Sale or disposition of real property. That meant Penelope legally could sell my house just as she had claimed. I kept reading, my hands trembling as I absorbed the full scope of what I'd signed. The document gave her authority over my bank accounts, my investments, my insurance policies, and yes, my real estate. It wasn't a limited medical power of attorney at all. It was a comprehensive financial power of attorney that essentially made her the legal owner of everything I possessed. But there was something else in the document that caught my attention. A clause near the end that read, "This power of attorney shall become effective only upon a determination by 2 licensed physicians that the principal is unable to manage her own affairs due to mental or physical incapacity." I read that section 3 times to make sure I understood it correctly. The power of attorney was supposed to be contingent on a medical determination of incapacity. It wasn't meant to be active unless and until doctors certified I was mentally or physically unable to handle my own affairs or property. Had such a determination ever been made? I certainly don't remember signing any papers with doctors stating I was incapacitated.
In fact, my most recent physical had been just 6 months earlier, and Dr. Patricia Hendricks at Willowdale Family Medical had pronounced me in excellent health for my age. I reached for my phone and dialed Dr. Hendricks's office. The receptionist, Maria, had known me for 15 years. "Eleanor, how are you feeling? Do you need to schedule your annual checkup?" "Actually, Maria, I have a question about my medical records. Has anyone requested documentation about my mental competency or ability to manage my own affairs?"
I'm just trying to understand some legal documents. Thank you, Maria. I hung up with my heart pounding. If the power of attorney was only supposed to be active when I was declared incapacitated and no such declaration had been made, then Penelope might not have the legal authority she claimed to have. But I needed to be sure. I needed professional advice. I looked up the number for Legal Aid of Millbrook County, a service I'd heard provided free legal consultations for seniors. When the receptionist answered, I explained my situation as briefly as possible. "Ma'am, you need to speak with attorney Jennifer Walsh. She specializes in elder law and power of attorney issues. Can you come in this morning? We have an opening at 10:30. I was dressed and ready to leave by 9:45, but as I gathered my purse and car keys, I heard a familiar voice calling my name from the front yard. Through my living room window, I saw Mrs. Ashworth walking up my front path, carrying a plate covered with aluminum foil. My first instinct was to hide. After what Penelope had said about Mrs. Ashworth reporting on me, I wasn't sure I could trust my oldest friend anymore. But avoiding her would only make things worse, and besides, I needed to know exactly what she'd told my daughter. I opened the front door before she could knock. "Good morning, Cordelia." She looked surprised by my formal tone. "Eleanor, dear, I brought you some of those cranberry muffins you like. I made extra this morning." She studied my face with concern. "You look tired. Are you feeling all right?" "I'm fine." "Cordelia, can I ask you something directly?" "Of course, dear. What is it?" "Have you been talking to Penelope about me, about my health or my ability to take care of myself?" The color drained from her face, and I had my answer before she spoke. "Oh, Eleanor, she called me last week and asked if I'd noticed any changes in you. She seemed so worried, and I may have mentioned that you seemed to be struggling a bit more with heavy groceries lately. I was concerned about your back, not your competence. I never meant to—" "What exactly did you tell her?" Cordelia set the muffins on my porch railing, wringing her hands. I said that I'd noticed you taking multiple trips to bring in groceries instead of carrying everything at once like you used to, and that your garden wasn't quite as pristine as it usually is. But Eleanor, I was just making conversation. I had no idea she would use it against you somehow." "She's trying to have me declared incompetent so she can sell my house and put me in a nursing home." Cordelia gasped, actually staggered backward. "What? That's impossible. Penelope would never do such a thing." "She called me at 3 a.m. this morning to inform me that the realtor is coming Thursday and the moving truck arrives Monday. She's already put a deposit on an apartment at Golden Years Manor." But that's your home. You can't just be forced to sell it." "Apparently, I can if someone has power of attorney and claims I'm not capable of living independently." Cordelia looked stricken. "Eleanor, I am so sorry. When Penelope called, she made it sound like she was just a concerned daughter checking on her mother's welfare. She asked if I thought you might benefit from some help around the house, and I said what any neighbor would say, that you're remarkably independent, but that we all slow down as we get older." "What else did she ask?" "She wanted to know if I'd noticed any signs of confusion or memory problems, any difficulty with daily tasks, whether you'd mentioned having financial concerns. I told her you seemed as sharp as ever, but that I had noticed you mentioning the rising cost of utilities and property taxes." Each revelation made my situation worse. Penelope had been systematically gathering information to build a case that I was declining mentally and financially. "Did you tell her I was having financial problems?" "No! I told her you were budgeting carefully like everyone on a fixed income, but that you seemed to be managing fine. Eleanor, I would never suggest you were having serious financial difficulties." But I could see how Penelope might have twisted that information. A neighbor reporting that I'd mentioned rising costs could easily become Eleanor is struggling financially and can't afford her expenses. Cordelia, I need you to be very careful about what you say to Penelope going forward. I don't think her motives are as pure as they seem. What can I do to help? This is partially my fault for talking to her in the first place. Right now, I need to get to a legal appointment. But Cordelia, if anyone comes around asking questions about me, realtors, social workers, anyone, please don't give them any information without calling me first. Of course, dear. And Eleanor, I've been your friend for 40 years. If you need someone to testify that you're perfectly capable of living independently, I'll do it gladly. That gave me the first moment of hope I'd felt since the phone call. Thank you. That might be more important than you realize. I arrived at the legal aid office 10 minutes early and spent the time reviewing my documents one more time. When Jennifer Walsh called my name, I was ready with a clear timeline of events and specific questions about my legal rights. Attorney Walsh was a woman in her 40s with graying brown hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Her office was small but organized, with law books lining the walls and family photos on her desk. Mrs. Blackwood, tell me what's happening. I explained everything, from signing the power of attorney after my hospital stay to the 3 a.m. phone call and Penelope's threats. I showed her the document and pointed out the clause about medical determination of incapacity. Attorney Walsh read through the power of attorney carefully, making notes on a legal pad. When she finished, she looked up with a grave expression. Mrs. Blackwood, you're absolutely right to be concerned. This is what we call a springing power of attorney, which means it only becomes effective when certain conditions are met. In this case, a determination of incapacity by 2 physicians. So Penelope doesn't actually have the authority to sell my house? Not unless she can produce medical documentation that you've been declared incapacitated. Have you been examined by any doctors recently who might have made such a determination? My regular doctor says I'm in excellent health, both physically and mentally. Then your daughter is operating outside her legal authority. However, Mrs. Blackwood, I need to warn you that if she proceeds with the sale anyway, stopping her could be complicated and expensive. Real estate transactions move quickly, and once a house is sold, reversing the sale becomes much more difficult. What can I do to protect myself? Several things. First, I recommend you revoke this power of attorney immediately. Since you're clearly competent to manage your own affairs, you have the right to cancel it at any time. She pulled out a form from her desk drawer. This is a revocation of power of attorney. We can file it today, and I'll send copies to your daughter, her husband, and any financial institutions they might have contacted. What if she ignores the revocation? Then she'd be acting without any legal authority whatsoever, which could expose her to criminal charges for fraud or elder abuse. I felt some of the weight lifting from my shoulders. What else should I do? I recommend you immediately contact any realtor your daughter has spoken with and inform them that you have not authorized the sale of your property. Also, contact your bank and any other financial institutions to alert them that previous communications from your daughter may not have been properly authorized. And the nursing home deposit? If they placed you on a waiting list or put down a deposit without your consent, that's another form of fraud. You should contact the facility immediately and clarify that you never agreed to admission. I left the legal aid office with a clear action plan and several important documents, including the power of attorney revocation and a letter from Attorney Walsh confirming my legal competency. But as I drove home, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something important. Why had Penelope been so confident that she could force this sale? Why had she moved so quickly and aggressively if her legal authority was questionable? There had to be more to the situation than a simple misunderstanding about power of attorney documents. I decided to start with the realtor. If Rebecca Chen was planning to come to my house Thursday morning, she needed to know that the listing was unauthorized. Prestige Properties was located in a gleaming office building in downtown Millbrook. The receptionist directed me to Rebecca Chen's office, where I found an impeccably dressed woman in her 30s reviewing property listings on multiple computer monitors. Mrs. Chen? I'm Eleanor Blackwood. I believe my son-in-law Marcus Caldwell has discussed listing my property with you. She looked up with a bright smile. Mrs. Blackwood! Yes, Marcus mentioned you might be coming in. I'm so excited to work with you on the sale of your home. The market is absolutely perfect right now for properties in your neighborhood. Actually, that's why I'm here. There's been a misunderstanding. I have not authorized the sale of my home, and I will not be listing it with your agency. Her smile faltered. I am sorry, I don't understand. Marcus was very clear that the family had decided to sell and that you had given your daughter power of attorney to handle the transaction. The power of attorney is no longer valid. I revoked it this morning. I handed her a copy of the revocation document. This again rendered null any agreements made under that authority. Rebecca scanned the document, her expression growing more confused by the moment. Mrs. Blackwood, I think there may be some miscommunication here. Marcus didn't just mention a possible listing. We already have a signed listing agreement. My heart stopped. What kind of signed listing agreement? She turned to her filing cabinet and pulled out a folder. A 6-month exclusive listing agreement for your property at 847 Willowbrook Lane, signed yesterday by Penelope Caldwell as your attorney in fact. She showed me a document with Penelope's signature at the bottom, right next to a line that read owner or authorized agent. This gives us exclusive right to market and sell your property. The listing goes live on the MLS system tomorrow morning. I stared at the document in shock. While I'd been sleeping, Penelope had been busy signing contracts and setting the sale of my home into motion. Mrs. Chen, this agreement was signed without proper authority. As I explained, the power of attorney has been revoked. But it was signed yesterday, before the revocation. Legally, this agreement may still be valid. Can you cancel it? I'll need to consult with our legal department. This is unusual. We don't typically have situations where the property owner disputes a listing signed by their power of attorney.
How quickly does this process usually move once the listing goes live? Rebecca looked uncomfortable. In this market, properties in your neighborhood are selling within days of listing, often with multiple offers above asking price. Marcus was very specific that this needed to move quickly. My head was spinning. Even if I could eventually cancel the listing agreement, how much damage could be done in the meantime? Could Penelope accept an offer before I could stop her? Mrs. Chen, I need you to understand something very clearly. I am 70 years old, in excellent health, and fully competent to manage my own affairs. I do not want to sell my home. Any offers received on this property are not authorized by me and will not be accepted. I understand your position, Mrs. Blackwood. Let me make some calls and see what our options are. Can I reach you at the number Marcus provided? I gave her my direct phone number and left the office feeling like I was racing against time. How many other agreements had Penelope signed in my name? How many other wheels had she set in motion while I was sleeping? My next stop was Millbrook Community Bank, where I'd done business for 38 years. I walked straight to the customer service desk and asked to speak with a manager about unauthorized access to my accounts. The manager, David Torres, was a man I'd known since he was a junior teller 15 years ago. He listened to my explanation with growing concern. Mrs. Blackwood, let me pull up your account activity. He typed on his computer, frowning at what he saw. I show several recent inquiries about your account balances and financial history, all authorized by someone claiming to represent you under power of attorney. What kind of inquiries? Balance verifications, transaction histories, questions about automatic payments and direct deposits. Someone also requested information about your mortgage status and property tax payments. Who made these inquiries? They came through Marcus Caldwell, who identified himself as acting on behalf of your daughter under power of attorney. He said he needed the information to help with your financial planning. Financial planning, or more accurately, building a case that I couldn't afford to keep my home. Mr. Torres, I'm revoking that power of attorney effective immediately. I also want to place a security alert on my accounts to prevent any unauthorized access or transactions. Of course. I'll also need to flag any pending transactions or automatic payments that might have been set up recently. He worked on his computer for several minutes. Mrs. Blackwood, I'm not seeing any new automatic payments or major transactions, but I do show that someone made inquiries about reverse mortgage options for your property. Reverse mortgage? What does that mean? It's a loan product for seniors that allows them to borrow against the equity in their home. The inquiries were made last week, asking about eligibility requirements and potential loan amounts. This was getting worse by the minute. Not only were they trying to sell my house, but they'd been exploring ways to borrow against it. I never authorized any inquiries about reverse mortgages. I'll make sure those inquiries are marked as unauthorized in your file. Is there anything else I can help you with? Yes. I want a complete record of every inquiry made about my accounts in the past 6 months, including who made them and what information was provided. By the time I left the bank, it was nearly 2 p.m. and I felt like I had been running a marathon. But I had one more crucial stop to make. Golden Years Manor, where Penelope claimed to have put down a deposit on an apartment for me. Golden Years Manor sat on 10 acres of landscaped grounds on the outskirts of Millbrook. It was an attractive facility, I had to admit, with modern buildings designed to look residential rather than institutional. But as I walked through the front doors, I felt like I was entering a prison. The receptionist, a cheerful woman named Susan, greeted me warmly. Are you here for a tour? We love showing prospective residents around our community. Actually, I'm here about a deposit that may have been placed on an apartment in my name. Eleanor Blackwood? She checked her computer. Oh, yes, Mrs. Blackwood. Your daughter was in yesterday with her husband. They put down a $2,000 deposit to hold a lovely studio apartment in our assisted living wing. You're scheduled to move in Monday morning. I never agreed to move here. The deposit was placed without my authorization. Her smile faded. I'm sorry, I don't understand. Your daughter had all the proper paperwork. She showed us a power of attorney document and explained that you'd had some cognitive decline that made it difficult for you to handle these arrangements yourself. Cognitive decline. The lies were getting more elaborate and more damaging to my reputation. I have not had any cognitive decline. I am here to inform you that I will not be moving into your facility, and I want that deposit refunded immediately. Mrs. Blackwood, I'll need to speak with our administrator about this situation. This is very unusual. Your daughter seemed very concerned about your welfare, and she provided medical documentation suggesting that you needed supervised care. What kind of medical documentation? I don't have access to the medical files, but she mentioned that you'd had several recent health scares and that your doctor had expressed concerns about your ability to live safely alone. More lies. Dr. Hendricks did say no such thing. I want to see whatever documentation my daughter provided, and I want to speak with your administrator immediately. The administrator, Mrs. Patricia Vaughn, was a stern-looking woman in her 60s who clearly took her responsibilities seriously. She reviewed my revocation of power of attorney carefully before speaking.
Mrs. Blackwood, your daughter presented herself as very concerned about your welfare. She described several incidents that suggested you were having difficulty managing independently. What kinds of incidents? Mrs. Vaughn consulted her notes. She said you'd gotten lost driving to the grocery store last month, that neighbors had reported finding you confused in your garden, and that you'd had several falls but hadn't sought medical attention. I was appalled. Every single claim was a complete fabrication. None of that is true. I have never gotten lost driving anywhere. I have never been confused in my garden, and I haven't fallen in years. She also provided a letter from someone claiming to be your neighbor, expressing concern about your well-being and your ability to live safely alone. What neighbor? She pulled out a document and handed it to me. It was typed on plain paper with no letterhead or identification and signed simply, "A concerned neighbor." The letter was devastating. Mrs. Blackwood has been showing clear signs of declining mental capacity over the past several months. She frequently appears confused about time and place, has difficulty completing simple tasks like bringing in groceries or maintaining her garden, and has expressed concerns about her financial situation. As someone who lives nearby and observes her daily activities, I believe she would benefit from professional care and supervision. "This is completely fraudulent," I told Mrs. Vaughn. "I can provide references from actual neighbors who will testify to my competence and independence." "I'm beginning to see that there may have been some misrepresentation here," Mrs. Vaughn said carefully. "However, Mrs. Blackwood, our policy requires that when we receive conflicting information about a prospective resident's capacity, we need to verify their competency through our own medical evaluation before we can release deposits or cancel admissions." "What does that mean?" "It means you'll need to undergo an assessment by our medical staff to demonstrate that you're capable of making your own decisions about living arrangements. It's designed to protect seniors from being manipulated by family members, but it works both ways." "How long does that process take?" "Usually 3 to 5 business days." I felt trapped. Even proving my competency was going to take almost a week, during which time Penelope could continue moving forward with her plans. "Mrs. Vaughn, I'll submit to whatever evaluation you require, but I need you to understand that I am the victim of elder abuse. My daughter is trying to steal my home and force me into care I don't need based on lies and fabricated evidence." "If that's the case, Mrs. Blackwood, then our evaluation will prove it. And if we determine that you were admitted under false pretenses, we'll not only refund your deposit, but also report the incident to Adult Protective Services." I left Golden Years Manor with a mixed sense of frustration and hope. The evaluation would clear my name, but it would take precious time I didn't have. As I drove home, my phone rang. It was Christopher calling from Portland. "Mom, I just talked to Penelope. She says you're moving to a senior community and that the house is being sold. What's going on?" I pulled into my driveway and sat in my car, explaining everything to my son. When I finished, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Mom, this is insane. Penelope can't just sell your house." "Apparently, she thinks she can." "Christopher, I need to ask you something. Has Penelope ever discussed concerns about my mental capacity with you? Has she suggested I might need supervised care?" "Absolutely not. In fact, just last month when we talked about your garden and your volunteer work at the library, she said she hoped she'd be as active and independent as you when she reached your age." That was interesting. If Penelope had been genuinely concerned about my well-being for months, why hadn't she mentioned it to Christopher? "Son, I may need your help with this situation." "Whatever you need, Mom. I can fly out there if necessary. This is wrong on every level." After we hung up, I sat in my driveway looking at my little house with new eyes. It wasn't just a building anymore. It was the center of a battle for my independence, my dignity, and my right to control my own life. But I was beginning to understand that this fight was about more than just keeping my home. Something about Penelope's behavior felt calculated and urgent in a way that suggested there were factors I didn't understand yet. Why the rush? Why the elaborate lies? Why the immediate threat of competency hearings if I refused to cooperate? I had a terrible feeling that the worst revelations were yet to come. As I unlocked my front door, I made a decision. I wasn't just going to defend myself against Penelope's attack. I was going to find out what was really behind it. Because something told me that my daughter's sudden concern for my welfare had very little to do with my well-being and everything to do with something else entirely. The investigation was just beginning. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table, surrounded by documents, phone numbers, and a growing list of questions that needed answers. The more I've learned about Penelope's activities,
the more convinced I became that this wasn't just about concern for my welfare. The elaborate lies, the forged documents, the urgent timeline, it all pointed to something bigger than family disagreement about my living situation. I decided to start where most secrets hide, in the details that people think no one will check. The first thing that struck me as odd was the timing. Why now? I'd been living independently in this house for years, since Thomas died. My health was good, my finances stable, my daily routines unchanged. What had suddenly made Penelope decide I was incompetent to manage my own affairs? I pulled out my calendar and began marking significant dates. The hospital stay that led to the power of attorney had been 14 months ago. But according to Rebecca Chen, the realtor, the urgency around selling my house had only emerged in the past few weeks. Marcus had described it as a time-sensitive situation that needed to move quickly. What had changed in the past month to create such urgency? I opened my laptop and began searching online for any information about Marcus Caldwell's business dealings. As a commercial real estate developer, he should have had a professional website, industry listings, maybe some news articles about his projects. What I found was concerning. Marcus Caldwell Development had a basic website that looked like it hadn't been updated in over a year. The Recent Projects section showed developments that had been completed 2 years ago, with no new construction or major deals listed. For someone who supposedly was doing well enough to live in Riverside Estates, his business appeared remarkably quiet. I dug deeper, searching for Marcus Caldwell in local business journals and real estate publications. What I discovered made my blood run cold. 6 months ago, the Millbrook Business Journal had run a small article titled, "Local Developer Faces Financial Challenges." The piece was brief, but it mentioned that Marcus Caldwell Development had defaulted on several construction loans and was facing pressure from creditors. According to the article, Marcus had been forced to halt work on a major shopping center project, leaving investors angry and subcontractors unpaid. The timeline was becoming clearer. Marcus's business troubles had started 6 months ago, right around the time Penelope had begun making more frequent visits to check on my welfare. But I needed more information. I called my friend Janet Morrison, who worked as a paralegal at Henley & Associates, one of Millbrook's larger law firms. Janet and I had been in book club together for 15 years, and she had a reputation for being discreet but well-informed about local business matters. "Eleanor, how nice to hear from you. How are you doing?" "I'm fine, Janet, but I need a favor. Can you tell me anything about the legal situation with Marcus Caldwell Development? I understand they've been having some financial difficulties." "Oh my, yes, it's been quite the mess. Marcus borrowed heavily to finance that shopping center project on Route 9, but the project ran into environmental issues and permit problems. The delays cost him millions, and when the primary investor pulled out, the whole thing collapsed." "How bad is it?" "Bad enough that he's facing multiple lawsuits from subcontractors and suppliers. The word around the legal community is that he's on the verge of bankruptcy." "Eleanor, why are you asking about this?" I explained my situation briefly, and Janet was quiet for a long moment. "Eleanor, if Marcus is facing bankruptcy, your daughter's house could be at risk. In most states, when someone files for bankruptcy, all marital assets are subject to seizure, including real estate owned by the spouse. Are you saying Penelope could lose her house? If Marcus files for bankruptcy, yes, unless they can prove the house was purchased entirely with Penelope's separate funds, it would be considered a marital asset. They could be forced to sell it to pay his business debts." The pieces were falling into place. Marcus wasn't just facing business failure. He was facing personal financial ruin that could destroy Penelope's lifestyle and security. And suddenly, my paid-off house worth $320,000 had become very interesting to them. But I needed to understand exactly how desperate their situation was.
I spent the next 2 hours online, researching public records and court filings. What I found was worse than I had imagined. Marcus Caldwell Development owed $2.3 million to various creditors. The company had defaulted on loans, failed to pay subcontractors, and was facing 17 separate lawsuits. 3 of the lawsuits were substantial enough that they'd resulted in liens being placed against Marcus's personal assets, including the house in Riverside Estates. But the most damning discovery came when I searched court records for recent filings. 2 weeks ago, just 2 weeks before Penelope's 3 a.m. phone call, a judge had ruled that Marcus Caldwell Development must liquidate all assets to pay creditors. The company had 30 days to comply or face forced bankruptcy. 30 days! That explained the sudden urgency around selling my house. I was so absorbed in my research that I almost missed the soft knock on my front door. Through the window, I could see a car I didn't recognize parked in my driveway. It was nearly 9 p.m., an unusual time for visitors. When I opened the door, I found a woman in her 40s wearing a business suit and carrying a briefcase.
Mrs. Blackwood, I'm Sarah Winters from Adult Protective Services. I received a call today expressing concern about your welfare. May I come in? My heart sank. This was exactly what Penelope had threatened. If I didn't cooperate, she'd have me declared incompetent through official channels. What kind of concerns were reported? The caller indicated that you might be experiencing cognitive decline and making poor decisions about your living situation. They suggested you might be at risk of financial exploitation or self-neglect. Who made this report? I can't disclose the caller's identity, but they identified themselves as a concerned family member. May I come in so we can discuss this privately? I had no choice but to let her in. Sarah Winters sat in my living room, taking notes as she observed my home environment. Everything was clean, organized, and well-maintained, which seemed to surprise her. Mrs. Blackwood, the report I received suggested that your house was in poor condition and that you were having difficulty with basic maintenance and self-care. That's clearly not the case. The report was false. I'm being targeted by family members who want to force me out of my home for their own financial gain. I showed her the documents I'd gathered, the revoked power of attorney, the fraudulent listing agreement, the fake concerned neighbor letter, and the evidence of Marcus's financial problems. Sarah reviewed everything carefully. Mrs. Blackwood, this appears to be a case of financial elder abuse rather than cognitive decline. The caller who impacted APS may have been trying to use our services to legitimize their claims about your competency. Can you help me stop them? I can document that you're clearly competent and living independently. That should prevent any further APS involvement. But Mrs. Blackwood, you need to be very careful. If someone is desperate enough to file false reports with APS, they may escalate their efforts in other ways. After Sarah left, I felt both relieved and more worried than before. I'd proven my competency to Adult Protective Services, but Penelope's desperation was becoming clearer by the hour. I called Christopher in Portland and filled him in on everything I'd discovered about Marcus's financial situation. Mom, this is fraud. They're trying to steal your house to save themselves from bankruptcy. But how can I prove it? They've been careful to make everything look legal. We need to document everything and probably hire a private investigator to get more evidence. Mom, how much money do you have available for legal expenses? That was a sobering question. My savings were modest, my income fixed. Fighting a protracted legal battle could bankrupt me even if I won. I don't have much, Christopher. Maybe $15,000 in savings? I can help with expenses, Mom. This is too important to let financial concerns stop us. After we hung up, I sat in my quiet house, feeling overwhelmed by the scope of what I was facing. But I also felt something I hadn't expected: determination. The more I learned about Penelope and Marcus's scheme, the angrier I became. They weren't just trying to steal my home, they were trying to destroy my reputation and my independence to cover their own failures. The next morning, I woke with a new sense of purpose.
I had 3 more days before the realtor was supposed to arrive, and I intended to use that time to gather every piece of evidence I could find. My first stop was the Millbrook County Courthouse, where public records would reveal the full extent of Marcus's legal and financial troubles. The clerk in the records office, Mrs. Helen Patterson, had helped me research property records when I'd been considering a small addition to my house years ago. Mrs. Patterson, I need to research all court filings related to Marcus Caldwell and Marcus Development over the past year. That's quite a lot of material, Eleanor. What exactly are you looking for? Evidence of financial fraud and elder abuse. Her eyebrows rose, but she helped me access the computer system and locate the relevant files. What I found was a paper trail of financial irresponsibility and increasing desperation. The earliest filings showed Marcus borrowing heavily against future projects, using his house and other assets as collateral. As problems mounted, he'd taken out additional loans at increasingly unfavorable terms. By 6 months ago, he was borrowing money just to make payments on earlier loans, a clear sign of approaching insolvency. But the most interesting discovery was a series of financial statements Marcus had filed with the court as part of the bankruptcy proceedings. These statements were required to list all assets, all debts, and all potential sources of income or financial relief. On page 12 of the most recent filing, under Potential Future Assets, someone had listed inheritance expectations from family members, estimated value $300,000 to $400,000. My house. Marcus had told the bankruptcy court that he expected to inherit money from family members, and the amount exactly matched the estimated value of my property. But there was more. In a supplemental filing made just last week, Marcus's lawyer had indicated that the inheritance expectations had been revised to imminent asset transfer from family member due to care needs, estimated timeline 30 days.
They weren't just planning to steal my house after I died. They were telling the bankruptcy court that I was voluntarily transferring my property to them because I needed care. And they'd done it under oath, which made it perjury as well as fraud. I made copies of every relevant document and drove straight back to Attorney Walsh's office. Mrs. Blackwood, this is devastating evidence. They've committed perjury in bankruptcy court by claiming you're voluntarily transferring property to them. What can we do with this information? Several things. First, I'm going to contact the bankruptcy trustee and inform them that the imminent asset transfer Marcus reported is actually attempted fraud. Second, we're going to file a formal complaint of elder abuse with the district attorney's office. And third, we're going to seek an emergency restraining order to prevent any further attempts to sell or transfer your property. How quickly can that happen? I can file for the emergency restraining order this afternoon. The other processes will take longer, but this evidence should be enough to stop their immediate plans. I left Attorney Walsh's office feeling hopeful for the first time in days. But as I drove home, I noticed a familiar car following me. When I turned onto Willowbrook Lane, the car continued past, but I caught a glimpse of the driver. It was Marcus. He was monitoring my movements, probably trying to figure out what I was doing and who I was talking to. The realization that they were actually surveilling me added a new layer of fear to an already frightening situation. I parked in my garage rather than my usual spot in the driveway and entered my house through the back door. As I settled at my kitchen table to review my notes, my phone rang. "Mom, it's Penelope. We need to talk. Immediately." Her voice was different, harder, more desperate than it had been during the 3 a.m. call. "What about?" "You've been interfering with legal proceedings and spreading lies about Marcus's business. You need to stop immediately or the consequences will be severe." "What consequences, Penelope?" "Mom, you're clearly having some kind of mental breakdown. The stories you've been telling people about fraud and elder abuse are delusional. We're going to have you evaluated by a psychiatrist, and if necessary, we'll have you committed for your own safety." The threat was chilling. They were escalating from financial manipulation to threats of forced psychiatric commitment. "Penelope, I know about Marcus's bankruptcy. I know about the court filings listing my house as an expected asset. I know you've been lying to realtors, nursing homes, and government agencies. This stops now." There was a long pause. When she spoke again, her voice was cold as winter wind. "Mom, you have no idea what you're dealing with. Marcus has connections throughout this county. Lawyers, judges,
doctors, business leaders. If we decide you're incompetent, you will be declared incompetent. If we decide you need psychiatric care, you will receive psychiatric care. And if we decide your house needs to be sold to protect your interests, it will be sold. Are you threatening me? I'm explaining reality to you. You can cooperate and make this easy on everyone, or you can fight us and lose everything anyway. Those are your only options. There's a third option, Penelope. I can expose everything you've done and send you both to prison for fraud and elder abuse. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. With what money, Mom? With what lawyers? With what evidence? You're an elderly woman making wild accusations against successful business people. Who do you think the courts will believe? The line went dead. I sat staring at the phone, my hands trembling. Penelope wasn't just trying to steal my house anymore. She was threatening to destroy my life if I resisted. But she'd made one crucial mistake. She assumed I was helpless and alone. An hour later, my doorbell rang. Through the window, I saw Christopher standing on my front porch with a suitcase in his hand. I caught the first flight out of Portland, he said as I let him in. Mom, this ends now. Christopher, you didn't have to come all the way here. Yes, I did. Penelope called me right after she talked to you. She tried to convince me that you were having some kind of mental breakdown and that I needed to support her efforts to get you help. But Mom, I've talked to you every week for years. You're as sharp as you've ever been. What did you tell her? I told her that if she proceeded with any attempts to have you committed or declared incompetent, I would testify in court that she was lying. I also told her that I've hired an attorney in Portland who specializes in elder abuse cases, and he's prepared to file federal charges if necessary. Did you really hire an attorney? Christopher smiled grimly. Yes, I did. His name is Robert Chen, no relation to the realtor, and he deals with cases like this all the time. He says what Penelope and Marcus are doing is textbook elder financial abuse, and the evidence you've gathered is more than sufficient for criminal charges. I felt tears of relief welling up in my eyes. For the first time since that 3 a.m. call, I didn't feel alone in this fight. What happens now? Now we go on the offensive. Attorney Chen has connections with the FBI's elder abuse unit, and they're very interested in cases involving bankruptcy fraud combined with elder abuse. Apparently, it's becoming a common scheme. People facing financial ruin target elderly relatives and use the legal system to steal their assets. The FBI?
When bankruptcy fraud is involved, it becomes a federal case. Mom, Penelope and Marcus aren't just trying to steal your house. They've committed multiple federal crimes in the process. That evening, Christopher and I sat at my kitchen table planning our counterattack. We had evidence of bankruptcy fraud, elder abuse, perjury, and attempted financial exploitation. More importantly, we had documentation proving every false statement Penelope and Marcus had made about my mental condition and need for care. But I knew this was far from over. Desperate people do desperate things, and Penelope's threats had made it clear that they were willing to escalate this situation to dangerous levels. Christopher, I'm worried about what they might do next. That's why I'm staying here until this is resolved. And Mom, Attorney Chen says we should expect them to make one final desperate move before they're forced to admit defeat. What kind of move? He thinks they'll try to have you involuntarily committed to a psychiatric facility. Once you're hospitalized and declared incompetent, they could proceed with selling the house while you're unable to stop them. The thought of being locked in a psychiatric ward while Penelope sold my home was terrifying, but Christopher's presence and the knowledge that we had federal law enforcement on our side gave me strength. Let them try, I said firmly. I've spent 70 years learning how to fight for what's mine. They picked the wrong old woman to mess with. As if summoned by my words, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Penelope's number. Don't answer it, Christopher said. From now on, all communication goes through the attorneys. The more desperate they get, the more likely they are to say something that will help our case. I looked at my phone as it continued ringing, then at my son, who had flown across the country to stand by my side, then around the kitchen, where I had shared 40 years of meals and memories with the people I loved. Penelope thought she could intimidate me into surrendering my home and my independence. She thought I was just a helpless old woman who would crumble under pressure.
She was about to learn that the woman who'd raised 2 children alone, survived cancer, and built a life from nothing wasn't going down without a fight. And this time, I wouldn't be fighting alone. The real battle was about to begin. The next morning brought news that changed everything. Attorney Walsh called at 7 a.m. with an update that made my blood run cold. Mrs. Blackwood, I have good news and very bad news. The good news is that the emergency restraining order has been approved. Penelope and Marcus are legally prohibited from taking any action regarding your property or your personal affairs. What's the bad news? They moved faster than we anticipated. Late yesterday evening, someone claiming to be your power of attorney signed a purchase agreement for your house. The buyer is putting down a cash offer of $340,000, and they want to close within 10 days. Christopher, who was listening on speakerphone, exploded. How is that possible? Mom revoked the power of attorney. The revocation wasn't filed with the county clerk until this morning. Technically, any agreement signed before the filing might still be legally binding, even though we know the power of attorney was fraudulent from the beginning. I felt the room spinning around me. Who's the buyer? That's where this gets really interesting. The purchasing entity is listed as Riverside Holdings, LLC. I did some research this morning, and Riverside Holdings was incorporated just 3 days ago by Marcus Caldwell. He's buying my house from himself? Essentially, yes. It's a shell company he created to make the transaction look legitimate. But here's the crucial detail. The $340,000 purchase price isn't real money. According to the financing documents, Riverside Holdings is getting a loan from Prestige Bank to fund the purchase, and guess who personally guaranteed that loan? Christopher and I looked at each other in bewilderment. Marcus Caldwell guaranteed his own loan to buy a house that doesn't belong to him using money he doesn't have through a company he created specifically for this fraud. It's the most elaborate shell game I've ever seen, and it's completely illegal. Can we stop it? The restraining order should prevent the sale from proceeding, but Mrs. Blackwood, they're clearly desperate enough to ignore court orders. We need to assume they'll try to complete this transaction regardless of legal consequences. After Attorney Walsh hung up, Christopher and I sat in stunned silence. The audacity of creating a fake company to steal my house was breathtaking. Mom, they've crossed into serious federal crime territory now. Bank fraud, wire fraud, money laundering. They're looking at decades in prison if they're convicted. Then why are they doing it? Because they're probably facing decades in prison for the bankruptcy fraud anyway. They've got nothing left to lose. The phone rang again. This time it was Mrs. Ashworth from next door, and she sounded frantic. Eleanor, there's a moving truck in your driveway and men are trying to get into your house. Christopher and I rushed outside to find exactly what she'd described. A large moving truck was parked in front of my house, and 2 men in work clothes were attempting to force open my front door. A third man, who I recognized as Marcus, was standing on my lawn talking loudly into his phone. "Stop right there!" Christopher shouted as we approached. "This is private property, and you're trespassing!"
Marcus ended his phone call and walked toward us with a confident smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Eleanor, Christopher, I'm glad you're both here. We're just getting started with the moving process." "There is no moving process," I said firmly. "I revoked the power of attorney and obtained a restraining order preventing you from taking any action regarding my property." "I'm afraid that's not accurate, Eleanor. The purchase agreement was signed before your little legal maneuvers, so the sale is proceeding as scheduled. Riverside Holdings takes possession today." Christopher stepped between Marcus and me. "Marcus, you created Riverside Holdings 3 days ago specifically to commit fraud. We have documentation proving the entire scheme is illegal." "That's a serious accusation, Christopher. I hope you have good lawyers, because making false statements about legitimate business transactions is grounds for a defamation lawsuit." The brazenness of his lies was stunning. Even caught red-handed, he was maintaining the pretense that this was a legal transaction. "Where's Penelope?"
I asked. "She's at the bank finalizing the loan documents. We should have everything completed by this afternoon." "What loan documents? You're buying my house with money you don't have, using a company that exists only on paper." Marcus's smile faltered slightly. "Eleanor, I understand this is difficult for you. Change is hard at your age. But fighting the inevitable will only make things worse. You should focus on adjusting to your new living situation." "My new living situation is right here in my own home." "Actually, it's not. Golden Years Manor called this morning to confirm your arrival this afternoon. Your room is ready, and the staff is looking forward to meeting you." The casual dismissal of my rights and autonomy was infuriating. But before I could respond, we heard sirens approaching. 2 police cars pulled up to my curb, followed by an unmarked sedan. From the sedan stepped a woman in a dark suit who approached us with purposeful strides. "I'm Special Agent Maria Rodriguez, FBI Financial Crimes Division. Mr. Caldwell, you're under arrest for bank fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit elder abuse." Marcus's face went white as Agent Rodriguez read him his rights. The moving crew scattered, leaving their truck behind as they realized they'd been hired to participate in a federal crime. "There must be some mistake," Marcus stammered as the handcuffs clicked around his wrists. "This is a legitimate real estate transaction." "Mr. Caldwell, we've been monitoring your activities for the past 48 hours. We have recordings of you instructing bank employees to process fraudulent loan documents, and we have evidence that you created a shell company specifically to steal Mrs. Blackwood's property." As they loaded Marcus into the police car, Agent Rodriguez turned to Christopher and me. "Mrs. Blackwood, we need to talk. There's more to this case than just the attempted theft of your house." We invited Agent Rodriguez inside, where she spread out a collection of documents that painted a picture of criminal activity far beyond what we'd discovered. "Mrs. Blackwood, your daughter and son-in-law aren't just facing bankruptcy. They've been running a sophisticated elder abuse scheme for over 2 years. You're not their first victim." "What do you mean?" "We've identified at least 4 other elderly individuals in this county who've been targeted by similar schemes. In each case, Marcus would identify seniors with valuable property, Penelope would befriend them or their families, and then they'd use various methods to gain control of the victim's assets." She showed us photographs and case files. An 82-year-old widower whose farm had been sold, for his own good, after Penelope convinced his family he had dementia. A 75-year-old woman whose antique collection had been liquidated after Penelope gained power of attorney by claiming the woman was being financially exploited by scam artists. An elderly couple who'd lost their savings account after Marcus convinced them to invest in his construction projects. How did they get away with it for so long? They were very sophisticated. They'd research their targets carefully, identify vulnerabilities, and then use the legal system to legitimize their theft. Power of attorney documents, guardianship proceedings, nursing home placements. They used every tool available to make their crimes look legal. What happened to the other victims? Agent Rodriguez's expression darkened. 2 of them died in nursing homes before their families realized what had happened. The other 2 are still fighting to recover their stolen assets. But the money's long gone. The scope of their criminal enterprise was overwhelming. This wasn't just about my house. Penelope and Marcus had been systematically destroying elderly people's lives for years. "Agent Rodriguez, where is Penelope now?" "She's been taken into custody at Prestige Bank. When she realized we were arresting Marcus, she tried to withdraw $50,000 in cash from accounts belonging to previous victims. The bank manager called us immediately." Christopher shook his head in disbelief. How could she do this to innocent people? "Financial desperation makes people capable of terrible things, Mr. Blackwood. When Marcus's construction business started failing, they needed money quickly. Elder abuse became their business model." Agent Rodriguez gathered up her documents. "Mrs. Blackwood, you should know that your resistance to their scheme is what broke this case open. Most victims are isolated and don't have family support. Your willingness to fight back, combined with your son's immediate involvement, gave us the evidence we needed to expose the entire operation."
After the FBI agent left, Christopher and I sat in my living room, trying to process everything that had happened. The moving truck was gone, the police cars had departed, and Willowbrook Lane was quiet again. But the emotional impact of discovering that my daughter was a career criminal who preyed on elderly people was devastating. This wasn't just about greed or financial desperation. This was about a fundamental lack of human decency. Mom, are you okay? I looked around my living room at the family photos that included pictures of Penelope at every stage of her life. Birthday parties, graduations, her wedding day, the births of her children. How had the little girl in those pictures become a monster who destroyed elderly people's lives for money? I keep thinking about those other victims, I said quietly. The ones who died in nursing homes, thinking their families had abandoned them. The ones who spent their final years believing they were a burden, instead of understanding they'd been targeted by criminals. You can't blame yourself for what Penelope became, Mom. Can I? I raised her. I taught her values, showed her right from wrong. Where did I fail? Christopher moved to sit beside me on the couch. Mom, you didn't fail. You raised a daughter who became successful and accomplished. But somewhere along the way, she chose greed over integrity. That's not your fault. The next few days brought a parade of law enforcement officials, lawyers, and reporters. The story of the elaborate elder abuse scheme made front-page news in the Millbrook Gazette, and the television stations picked up the story as well. The public attention was uncomfortable, but it served an important purpose. 2 more elderly victims came forward after seeing the news coverage, bringing the total number of Marcus and Penelope's victims to 6. Attorney Walsh kept me updated on the legal proceedings. Mrs. Blackwood, they've both been denied bail. The judge ruled that they pose a flight risk and a continuing danger to the community. The federal prosecutor says they're looking at 15-20 years in federal prison if convicted on all charges. What about restitution for the other victims? That's more complicated. Most of the stolen money has been spent or hidden in offshore accounts. The FBI is working with international agencies to trace the funds, but recovery will take years if it's possible at all. 3 weeks after their arrest, I received an unexpected visitor. Jeremy and Julian, Penelope's 8-year-old twin boys, arrived at my door with their paternal grandmother, Mrs. Dorothy Caldwell. Mrs. Blackwood, I hope you don't mind us coming by unannounced. The boys wanted to see you, and there are some things that need to be said. I invited them in, uncertain how to handle this delicate situation. The boys looked confused and scared, clearly not understanding why their parents were suddenly gone. Grandma Eleanor, why are Mommy and Daddy in jail? Mrs. Patterson at school said they were bad people, but they're our parents. My heart broke for these innocent children, caught in the middle of their parents' criminal choices. Jeremy, your parents made some very bad decisions that hurt other people. Sometimes when adults make bad choices, they have to face consequences, even if it hurts their families. Did they hurt you? Julian asked. They tried to, but I was able to stop them with help from your Uncle Christopher and some very good police officers. Mrs. Caldwell spoke up. Boys, why don't you go look at the garden while I talk to Mrs. Blackwood? After the children went outside, she turned to me with tears in her eyes. Eleanor, I owe you an apology. I knew Marcus was having business troubles, but I had no idea about any of this. When the FBI showed me the evidence, I was horrified. My son became a criminal, and he dragged your daughter down with him. Mrs. Caldwell, you're not responsible for their choices any more than I am. Maybe not, but I should have paid more attention to what was happening. I should have asked more questions when Marcus started talking about inheritance opportunities and helping elderly family members with their finances. What's going to happen to Jeremy and Julian? They'll live with me for now. I've started the process to get permanent custody. Penelope and Marcus both signed over parental rights rather than fight it from prison. She paused, wiping her eyes. Eleanor, those children love you. You've been a wonderful grandmother to them, and I hope we can maintain that relationship despite
everything that's happened. I looked out the window at Jeremy and Julian examining my tomato plants, their innocent faces unmarked by understanding of their parents' crimes. Of course, Dorothy, those children are not responsible for their parents' actions. They're welcome here anytime. 6 months later, I was working in my garden when Attorney Walsh called with the final update on the case. Mrs. Blackwood, the final sentencing hearing was this morning. Marcus received 18 years in federal prison. Penelope received 15 years. With federal sentencing guidelines, they'll both serve at least 85% of their sentences. How did they react? Marcus maintained his innocence to the end, but Penelope asked me to give you a message.
I stopped weeding, my hands still in the soil. What message? She said to tell you she's sorry. She said she knows that's not enough, but she wanted you to know that she remembers the mother who raised her to be better than what she became. I sat back on my heels, looking up at the house I'd fought so hard to keep. Penelope's apology didn't undo the damage she'd caused to me or to her other victims. It didn't bring back the elderly people who died believing their families had abandoned them. It didn't restore the life savings stolen from trusting seniors. But it was acknowledgement that somewhere inside the criminal she'd become, there was still a flicker of the daughter I'd raised. Attorney Walsh, what's the final count on victims who came forward? 11 elderly individuals and their families. The total amount stolen was over $1.8 million. The FBI believes there may be more victims who never realized they'd been targeted. That evening, Christopher called from Portland, where he'd returned to work after spending 3 weeks with me during the crisis. Mom, how are you doing with everything? I'm okay, Christopher. It's been hard, but I'm okay. Any regrets about fighting them instead of just moving to Golden Years Manor? I looked around my kitchen, at the table where Thomas and I had shared breakfast for 37 years, at the window that looked out on the garden where I'd taught Jeremy and Julian to plant seeds just last weekend. No regrets. This is my home, and I was right to fight for it. But Christopher, it's not just about the house anymore. What do you mean? I mean, I've learned something about myself through all this. I'm not just an elderly woman waiting for other people to make decisions about my life. I'm still capable of fighting for what's right, not just for myself, but for other people who can't fight for themselves. What are you thinking of doing? I smiled, feeling a sense of purpose I hadn't experienced in years. I'm thinking of volunteering with the Elder Abuse Prevention Program. Agent Rodriguez says they need people who understand how these schemes work, people who can educate other seniors about the warning signs. Mom, that's a wonderful idea. Jeremy and Julian need to see that their family isn't just about the criminal choices their parents made. They need to know that fighting for justice and protecting vulnerable people is also part of their heritage. A year later, I was giving a presentation to a group of seniors at the Millbrook Community Center about recognizing and preventing elder abuse. In the audience, I spotted Mrs. Henderson, the 85-year-old neighbor who supposedly reported concerns about my competency to Penelope. After the presentation, she approached me with tears in her eyes. Eleanor, I need to apologize. Your daughter called me last year and asked about your well-being. I told her you seemed fine, but she kept pressing me to think of anything that might suggest you needed help. Finally, just to end the conversation, I mentioned that I'd noticed you making multiple trips to bring in groceries. I never thought she'd use that against you. Mrs. Henderson, you don't need to apologize. Penelope manipulated a lot of people. But I keep thinking about how she twisted my innocent observation into ammunition for her scheme. How many other neighbors said similar things without realizing how they'd be used? Her question highlighted one of the most insidious aspects of elder abuse schemes. The criminals don't just target their victims, they manipulate the victim's entire support network, turning friends and neighbors into unwitting accomplices. That's exactly why education is so important, I told her. We need to help people understand how their words can be twisted and used against vulnerable seniors. Today, 3 years after that terrifying 3 a.m. phone call, I'm still living independently in my house on Willowbrook Lane. Jeremy and Julian visit every Saturday, and we work in the garden together while they tell me about school and friends and dreams for the future.
Mrs. Ashworth and I still have coffee every Tuesday morning, though our conversations now include updates on my volunteer work with elder abuse prevention. I've helped identify 2 potential schemes before they could harm their intended victims, and I've testified at 3 criminal trials as an expert witness on elder abuse tactics. Christopher visits twice a year, and we often talk about the lessons we learned from our family crisis. The most important lesson is that age doesn't equal helplessness, that having experienced decades of life doesn't make someone automatically vulnerable to manipulation and control. The second lesson is that fighting back against injustice, even when the odds seem overwhelming, is always worth the effort. Not just for yourself, but for all the other potential victims who might be saved by your courage. But the hardest lesson has been accepting that the people we love most are capable of terrible things. Penelope is still in federal prison. She has 8 more years to serve on her sentence. I write to her occasionally, brief letters about the children and the seasons and small neighborhood news. She writes back sometimes, letters filled with regret and promises to be better when she gets out. I don't know if I'll live long enough to see her released. I don't know if she'll truly be a different person when that day comes. But I know that Jeremy and Julian deserve to have someone in their family who believes in second chances and the possibility of redemption.
Most importantly, I know that I'm exactly where I belong, in my own home, surrounded by my own memories, making my own choices about my own life. At 73 years old, I'm not slowing down. I'm not becoming a burden. I'm not preparing to be cared for by others. I'm still fighting, still growing, still learning new ways to make a difference in this world. And that, more than anything else, is why this little house on Willowbrook Lane was worth fighting for. So, dear viewers, what would you have done in my situation? Have you ever faced a situation where family members tried to control your life for your own good? Share your thoughts in the comments below and let me know which country you're watching from. Remember, age is just a number. Your right to independence, dignity, and self-determination doesn't expire when you reach a certain birthday. If someone tells you otherwise, they might be the problem, not your age. Thank you for following my story to the end. Stay strong, stay independent, and never let anyone convince you that being older means being powerless. Until next time, this is Eleanor Blackwood, reminding you that it's never too late to fight for what's yours.